In 2018, former Obama administration senior official Ben Rhodes published a memoir detailing his years working in the White House, including how the administration addressed the leaking of classified information by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden in 2013.
And according to journalist Glenn Greenwald, the memoir proves that the Obama administration intentionally maligned Snowden and forced him to take permanent residence in Russia, despite desperate attempts by Snowden to leave at the time, saying in part, quote, "It is hard to overstate how dispositively Rhodes' own book proves that Obama's officials generally and Rhodes specifically lied blatantly and cavalierly to the public about what happened, a level of sustained and conscious lying that can be explained only by sociopathy." Glenn Greenwald is here to discuss. So, Glenn, I mean, clearly he was bragging in his book, and while bragging, he unveiled the truth. So share with us exactly what that truth was and how he went about doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like most people are skeptical of the media, believe the media is capable of lying, but you really don't get the full appreciation for how constantly they do it, how readily they do it in partnership with the government until you're actually in the middle of a particular news event. And then you just are constantly reading and hearing the government saying things that you know firsthand is a lie. And that happened to me all the time in the Snowden story. And one of the biggest lies was their use over the course of 8 years to malign Snowden as a traitor, as a Russian spy, using the fact that he had, in their words, chosen Russia as his destination. And why would you choose Russia as your destination if you were actually a patriot and cared about civil liberties? And the whole time I knew this was a lie because I was in Hong Kong with him. I knew exactly what his plan was, which was to leave Hong Kong, fly through Moscow to Havana, through Havana, and then on his way to Bolivia or Ecuador to try and seek asylum there. Obviously, WikiLeaks was helping. Julian Assange at the time had asylum with Ecuador. He was living in the Ecuadorian embassy, obviously had contacts with the government. And so it was a very good bet he could get asylum in one of those two countries. When he got to Moscow, he was prevented from leaving. His plan was to leave immediately, the airport, because the Obama administration had invalidated his passport, which prevented him from boarding an international flight. And more importantly, had bullied the Cubans because the only way Snowden was going to fly through Havana was with a promise from the Cuban government that you have a right of safe passage, that if you fly through Havana, we're not going to detain you and turn you over to the Americans, which is a promise that they had made. The Obama administration bullied the Cubans, threatening them to withdraw that guarantee. And when they withdrew that guarantee, he could no longer fly through Havana. That was always what I knew had happened. But you had Obama officials out there for 8 years saying, who could consider this guy a patriot or a whistleblower? He chose Russia. He sought refuge from Vladimir Putin. And so in Ben Rhodes' memoir, he was writing a chapter about Cuba, not about Snowden. So he forgot his lie. And he was boasting of how great his work was in helping the U.S. and Cuba normalize relations. And the story he told was that he had gone to Cuba once he heard that they had offered Snowden safe passage and said to the high official in the Cuban government, if you don't withdraw this guarantee, there's no chance of us normalizing relations with you. And then he says, I was so happy when I picked up the paper 2 days later and heard the report that said Edward Snowden is now stranded in the Moscow airport because the Cuban government had withdrawn its permission for him to fly through Havana. And he said that showed me that the Cubans were really serious. So we have audio of Ben Rhodes saying on various shows, Hillary Clinton saying, obviously Snowden is a traitor. He chose Russia as his place to go. And then in his own book, he's saying he never wanted to go to Russia. He was desperate to get out. I, Ben Rhodes, am the one who successfully prevented him from leaving.
Mm-hmm. The one other move that they pulled at that time was forcing Evo Morales' plane to the ground because they suspected that that perhaps he was on that plane, which reminds me that Morales overthrown in a coup in 2019. Ecuador's government went through a transition, which contributed to Assange getting booted out. In some ways, was the Obama administration being too clever in the sense that Snowden is now still free in Russia, and he's not free to return to the United States. But if he had successfully gotten to Ecuador or Bolivia, political events since then would have put him at risk of being extradited to the United States. He could be in a supermax right now.
he probably would be, exactly as you said. They successfully bullied the Ecuadorian government, which under Rafael Correa was a very kind of anti-imperialist government, very defensive of their sovereignty, which is why they gave asylum to Assange and let him stay in the embassy for 8 years. And Correa's successor, Lenin Moreno, was much more pliable and weak. And it was the Trump administration that successfully bullied / coerced / bribed Ecuador to withdraw the protection from Assange, which is what enabled the British police to then go in, enter the building, and arrest him. And of course, as you say, that would have happened to Snowden had he made it to Ecuador. And it probably would have happened in Bolivia as well, certainly with the coup that the U.S. cheered. So, on the one hand, you're right. They kind of defeated their own objective of getting their hands on Snowden by trapping him in Moscow. But they also knew, Ryan, that forcing him in Moscow to stay in Russia would be a big propaganda coup. They wanted him in Russia so that they could try and convince people, knowing, as we saw in 2016, that Russia still has a great hold on the American imagination as an enemy, that it would be harder to, valorize what he did if they could say that he chose to seek refuge in Russia the way Cold War traitors had done for so long. It was just so interesting, though, because they did seem genuinely concerned. They would often accuse Snowden of having turned over this, they would say he has millions of highly sensitive documents about our most sensitive secrets, and they would imply that he turned them over to Russia. If they were really worried about Russia's ability to force Snowden to hand over these documents, the last thing you would want to do is trap Snowden in Russia. And yet that's what they did. They trapped Snowden in Russia. So to the extent there was ever a danger that Russia could get their hands on these documents, we have no evidence they did or could. But to the extent that they could, which is what the Obama administration claims happened, it was also because they trapped him in Russia and forced him to remain there.
Well, Glenn, that's the key point to me. And this is stunning, this revelation, and sound the alarm as much as you can, because you really do have Ben Rhodes admitting they forced him to stay in Russia. But my question, because I admit I'm somebody who is on the side of, well, if he's in Russia, it's hard to not see him as a Russian asset. But you could actually, from the point you're making, say the Obama administration was more responsible for any of the potential data that he had falling into the hands of the Kremlin by forcing him there, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, the whole, insinuation or sometimes even explicit allegation that Snowden turned over secret documents to the Russian government or even the Chinese never made any sense for a lot of different reasons, beginning with the fact that Snowden has already proven that he would sooner go to jail for the rest of his life than help a government engage in mass surveillance, right? He demonstrated to all of us that he would rather go to prison in order to defend the internet. So why would he turn over documents that could help the Russians spy? Because they were threatening him that if he didn't, he would end up going to prison. He'd already proved that he would rather go to prison than help surveillance. So it never made sense in the first place, the rationale. There was never any evidence presented that Snowden gave documents to any other government. He says adamantly, and I know it's true, that he didn't even take the archive with him and didn't have access to it any longer out of fear that while he's traveling around the world, if a government could torture him, he wouldn't have the capability to turn over access to those documents. But you're right, to the extent that anyone believes that might have happened, there's only one entity to blame for that, which is the Obama administration for forcing him into the grip of the Russian government by not allowing him to leave that airport.
And your point about the propaganda value of having him be in Russia, I think is a really important one, because even though, as you said, like the Ecuadorian government was under the control of an anti-imperialist government at the time, and Evo Morales was in power in Bolivia, the U.S. government has to know that those are still, kind of within the Monroe Doctrine countries. If he winds up there, at some point in the future, they're going to have access to him. And so, they consciously decided that they would rather not have access to him in the future to be able to put him in prison, which actually then enables people to valorize him more. If you're a martyr, if you're in prison for what you've done, as you just said, that gives real credit to the bravery that it took to do it. But if you're sitting in an apartment in Moscow and doing interviews on RT, then it's very easy then to discredit him to an American public. So I think that is That is a really important insight into what their strategy was as it related to Snowden.
Yeah, even in Ben Rhodes' book, he's still lying. He says that Snowden's plan was to go to Venezuela, knowing how Americans think about Venezuela very differently than how they think about Bolivia and Ecuador, which whatever you want to say about Rafael Correa and Evo Morales, nobody doubts they were democratically elected. Those are democratic countries. At least they were until the coup in Bolivia in 2019 that the U.S. cheered, but now it's been restored, which is why he went there. And I think, Snowden was always extremely conscious of the government's propagandistic attempts to demonize him. Even now they'll say he went to China. He didn't go to China. He went to Hong Kong. He purposely chose a place. He needed to go to a place that would be safe from the American government's ability to get their hands on him. He couldn't go to Ecuador or Bolivia in the first place because, as you say, they control Latin America. So we did need to go to a place where the Americans would have a hard time getting their hands on him. But he purposely chose a place in Hong Kong that is a symbol of resistance to tyranny. People in Hong Kong are fighting mainland China. They're protesting in the street. They're fighting for free speech and free press rights. And so you'll see all the time when the Obama officials talk about Snowden, they'll slip in, they'll say, first he went to China, as though he had gone to Beijing, to mainland China, even though he went to Hong Kong on purpose. He never would have gone to a country that they could have used to demonize him, like Russia. And so you're right, Ryan, they made so many calculations about that were probably contrary to their own interests, because what they were really more afraid of than anything was Snowden being turned into a hero, because that would inspire other people inside government to discover their crimes and unconstitutional programs and illegalities and blow the whistle. They were desperate not to allow Snowden to become valorized and to be inspiring as an example to others, and that's why it was so important to them. They would rather have trapped him in Russia with all the risks that entailed, just to allow them to impugn his motives.
Also real quick and unrelated to this, Ben Rhodes is well known for not having a national security or foreign policy background, but having a master's in literature. So,
creative writing.
Creative writing. How's the book? How's the book? Is it? I haven't read it yet. I've been meaning to. Is it well written aside from the politics?
Well, the funny thing is, the memoir itself was written in 2018. He has a new book out in 2021, giving his foreign policy perspective. The reason I got that 2018 book, I never read it before, was because there are passages in there about how the military purposely kind of cornered Obama out of leaving Afghanistan by leaking that they just needed another year and 50,000 troops. So I got the book in order to read that part, and then I found the Snowden part. It's a decent book if you want to know how the national security state functions. At the same time, he is a propagandist, extremely loyal to Obama, so a lot of it is just hagiography about Obama and himself. So no, I wouldn't recommend it being as something worth reading unless you want to discover Ben Rhodes accidentally revealing his own lies because of the service to his ego.
Right. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
All right, good to speak with you guys. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.